I still remember the night when I saw him standing under the flickering streetlight, holding his little girl in his arms, her tiny head resting on his shoulder, and her thin, frail fingers clutching his worn-out shirt as if she was holding on to the last piece of safety in her world. Tell us where you're watching from. We'd truly love to know, and if there was a moment in this story that touched your soul, please share it with us in the comments. It would mean the world to us to hear your heart. His eyes were tired, but they carried a strange fire, a mix of fear and determination, as if the whole universe had placed an impossible burden on his back. Yet he refused to bend. The rain was pouring, but he had no umbrella, no shoes, only bare feet soaked in mud. As he walked through the dark alley, clutching a small plastic bag, inside it was the last medicine for his daughter, medicine he had bought after working 16 hours carrying bricks for a construction site where nobody even knew his name. He had eaten nothing since morning, but his concern was not hunger. His little girl's fever had been rising for 3 days, and the doctor had warned him that if she did not get treatment tonight, she might not make it. His mind kept replaying those words while his heart kept whispering one thing over and over, and not lose her. She was all he had left. After fate had torn away his wife in a road accident 2 years ago, the city around him was indifferent. Loud buses rushing past, people hurrying into their warm homes, neon lights flashing, promises of wealth and pleasure, none of which he would ever touch. He reached his small one-room house with a leaking roof and walls that smelled of dampness. The little girl was lying on a thin mattress, her forehead burning, her lips dry. She opened her eyes and gave him a faint smile that broke his soul in ways words could never describe. He fed her the medicine, whispering gentle words, pretending to be strong while inside he was drowning in fear. He held her tiny hand until she slept, her breathing slow but uneven. That night, he sat beside her with no sleep in his eyes and a storm in his chest, thinking about what he would do next if the medicine failed. He knew the hospital would not admit her without money, and he had nothing left to sell except for the one thing he had been keeping hidden, the only object from his past that carried his deepest memories. He touched the small wooden box under the bed, feeling its weight as if it could decide life or death for his daughter. His fingers trembled as he pulled the wooden box from under the bed, its surface scratched and faded by time. Inside was a gold chain wrapped in an old cloth, the only thing his wife had left him before she died. It was not just a piece of metal, it was a part of her, a reminder of every moment they had shared, every promise they had made. He had sworn never to part with it, but tonight, that promise felt like a luxury he could no longer afford. He sat in silence for a long time, staring at the chain, hearing the rain outside like a clock ticking away. His daughter's chances of survival in his mind, a battle raged between memory and necessity. Finally, he stood up, wrapped the chain back in the cloth, and stepped into the wet night again. The pawn shop was across town, and every step felt heavier than the last. The streets were nearly empty, except for the occasional drunk man stumbling past, or the distant sound of a dog barking. The city felt colder than usual, not just in temperature but in spirit. As he reached the shop, its shutter was half closed. The owner, a man with sharp eyes and a sharp tongue, looked him over and smirked when he saw the chain. The price he offered was insultingly low, but the father had no choice. He walked out with the crumpled notes in his hand, feeling as if he had just buried a part of his heart. He did not go home immediately. Instead, he went straight to the private clinic where the doctor had earlier refused him without payment. When he placed the money on the counter, the nurse finally called the doctor, and they examined his daughter in a small cold room with peeling paint. The diagnosis was more serious than he had feared. She needed a treatment that would take days and cost more than what he had just paid. He begged for them to start anyway, promising he would find the rest. The doctor hesitated, then agreed to begin the first part of the treatment. That night, as his daughter slept in the clinic bed hooked up to N4, he sat in the hallway, staring at the floor. A man in a gray coat approached and sat beside him, asking softly what had happened. The father told him everything without expecting help. The man listened quietly, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper with an address written on it. He told the father to go there tomorrow morning and mention His name without asking questions. The father hesitated, wondering if this was a trap or a blessing, but something in the man's eyes told him it was worth the risk. When he returned to the clinic room, his daughter's breathing was a little easier, yet his mind was restless. The address in his pocket felt like a door waiting to be opened, a door that could lead to hope or danger. He decided that no matter what awaited him, there he would go, because for her, he would walk into fire without looking back. At dawn, the father left the clinic with the address in his pocket, the sky still heavy with clouds and the streets damp from last night's rain. The place was on the far edge of the city, past markets and factories where the smell of smoke and oil filled the air. He reached a narrow lane where the buildings leaned close together, as if whispering secrets to each other. The address led him to a rusted metal gate. He knocked once, twice, and then it opened slowly, revealing a dimly lit workshop. Inside, men were working quietly, shaping wood, polishing furniture, and moving crates. A tall, elderly man stepped forward and asked who he was. The father mentioned the name given by the stranger in the gray coat. The old man studied his face for a moment, then nodded and called him inside. He was led to a back room where the old man placed a small envelope on the table. Inside it was more money than he had ever seen in his life. Confused, he asked why this was happening. The old man told him that years ago, the stranger in the gray coat had been a poor boy himself who once received help from a kind stranger. Now, he repaid that debt by helping others in desperate need. The money was not a gift, but an advance payment for work the father could start immediately, building crates and polishing wood with honest pay that would cover his daughter's treatment and more. His hands shook as he accepted the offer for the first time in years. He felt a weight lift from his chest. He ran back to the clinic, his heart pounding, not from exhaustion, but from hope. The doctor smiled faintly when he handed over the full amount and began the complete treatment. Over the next week, he worked at the workshop every day, returning to the clinic every night to watch over his daughter. Slowly, her color returned. The fever broke and her laughter began to echo faintly in the small hospital room. One evening, as the sun set, he sat beside her bed, holding her tiny hand. When she looked up at him and asked if Mama could see them from the sky, he swallowed hard, fighting back the tears, and whispered, "Yes, my little one, she sees us, and she is proud." The next morning, they were allowed to go home, and as he carried her in his arms, walking through the same streets that had once felt so cold, he noticed they no longer seemed as dark. The flickering streetlight near his house was still there, but now it felt less like a lonely witness and more like a quiet guardian. The gold chain was gone, yet in its place, he had gained something far more precious: a second chance for his daughter and the strength to face whatever storms might come.